Okay, class implementation, and here we're implementing the methods of the public interface. So first of all, let's start with the default constructor. And you'll see in the screencast, but typically these method implementations appear just below the definition of the class. So for context, if this is the end of our time class, then our implementation would just go below that. So the first thing we're going to implement is the default constructor. And if you remember, its definition looked something like this. And we had a semicolon here. Well, the implementation looks very much the same. We remove the semicolon. We add the class name and the scoping operator, and then a compound statement for the body of the method. And now we just implement the logic of the method in the body. This particular default constructor is just going to set my two private data members, hours and minutes, to 0. And again, this is just a very quick way to do this. We'll think about some other issues as we go along. And so all this is going to do is it's going to initialize my private data members to 0. Now the explicit constructor, we're going to write it very much the same way. I give the name of the class, the scoping operator, the name of the method. In this case, it's a constructor. And then I write the parameters. And what I want to do is someone, so for example, let's say in main, let me give you examples of these two things. If someone declares a time object like this, then what this is doing is this is invoking the default constructor. And what's going to happen in memory is we get this time object, and it declares, or it allocates space for hours and minutes. I'm not going to have space to write that out. And once the space for our time object gets allocated, then we execute the default constructor, and that assigns hours and minutes to 0. In this case, we get to specifically provide a time. And what should happen here is 4 is being passed in as the new hours and 20 is being passed as the new minutes, and we want those to wind up being set to the private data members. So we can do that using the assignment hours is equal to new hours and minutes is equal to new minutes. So now in this case, we have the time object. So again, what happens is we allocate space for the time object, which includes 2 integers for hours and minutes. Once the space is allocated, then we execute the explicit constructor. And in that execution, the actual parameter 4 gets mapped to the formal parameter new hours, 20 gets assigned to the parameter new minutes, and then we execute. And we do these two assignments. We take the value 4 and we store it in hours. We take the value 20 and we store it in minutes, just like that. So this is how we implement our two constructors. To implement our get methods, So now, unlike the constructors, the rest of our methods have return types. So we write the return type first, and these are going to be for our get methods. They're both going to return integers. Then we write the name of the class. In this case, it's time, followed by the scoping operator, and then the name of the method. In this case, it's get hours. And then we have the body. Get methods are very simple. All it's going to do is return the value stored in the private data member hours. And we can do that by simply writing return hours. The get method for minutes is going to be exactly the same. And so how we would use this is, if we have a time object, and we wanted to manipulate just the hours, or we wanted to see what the hours for that time object were, then we could just say cout time dot get hours. And this would return 12, which would get printed to the console. Now, in terms of our set methods, what we want to be able to do there is change the hours or change the minutes. So these are going to have void return types. Then we follow with the class name and the scoping operator. And we call the method set minutes. And we're passing in an integer value, and this will be the new minutes. And we want to make a very similar assignment as the one that we did in the constructor. This is the new value for the private data member minutes, and so we simply make that assignment. We're going to do the same thing for hours. So now in a program, if we wanted to change this from 12 to 14, then we could say time set hours to 14. We could do the same thing for minutes. Just like that. So now we have, at this point in execution, our time object has a value of 14 for hours and a value of 37 for minutes. So now let's look at how to implement our input and output methods. So we'll start with the print method. So again, we have the return type of void, the name of the class, followed by the scoping operator, the name of the method, and then the parameter list. So for now, let's just stick with military time and how that would look to someone. So if we have a time object, let's say, and its hours and minutes are 14 and 23, then we would expect to see that printed 14:23. So we have this value stored in hours, and we have this value stored in minutes. And we want this to go to the console. So the output statement we write is simply cout, and I can print hours. and then I want to print the colon as a character, and then I can print minutes. So there's my print method. Now when someone enters a time object from the keyboard, I want them to enter it in exactly the same format. So we have to read an integer 14, or the first integer, then we read a character, and then we read the minutes. So the implementation, and this is going to come from the console input. First of all, I need a character CH for reading, and I can read into the private data member hours. Then I need to read the character CH, which is going to be my colon, and then I can read minutes. And that's my enter method. So this will let someone enter a time object from the keyboard. Now, the read and write methods are going to be very similar, except I'm not going to store the colon when I write this time object to disk. So the write method, I have the class name. And the way that I've set this up, I have an output stream that's being passed in, and I'm simply going to write to that output stream the hours, separated by a space in this case, followed by minutes. That is my write method. And then the read method simply reads two integers from the input stream that comes in as the parameter. And I can read two integers like so. And I don't have to worry about reading this space that's in between the hours and the minutes, because as you know, the stream extraction operator skips over any white space. That's the implementation of my input methods. Print and enter will be used for communication with the user. Remember, if I've got my app and here's my time object, I'm going to use print and enter for interaction with the user, and then I'm going to use read and write for interaction with the disk or whatever, the network or whatever the storage device is.